You're watching the first part of a two-part interview series. It was split into two parts because I didn't want you to miss a thing. Heather Holland is here, and she is going to be discussing her health journey and some things that you need to look out for when you are going to go to the hospital to ensure that the doctors are giving you the best care. It's an incredible story. Stick around. This is part one.
Don't wait till the battle's over. Don't wait till the struggle ends. Shout now, shout now, right now. Shout now, shout now. Don't wait till you make it.
Welcome to the Phillip Show. Grab your coffee if you have not already. So this show is going to be super important, specifically for those who are looking for answers, who are looking for hope, who may be looking for help, but who also want to learn what happens when there are health challenges. How does it change your life? And how do you find the courage to move through it, to move past it, and come out the other side as an advocate? You hear me say this often. A lot of times our lanes that we navigate in now were built on a lot of the experiences that we've had in the past. And if they've been some sort of traumatic experience, if they've been a challenging experience, we're a lot more empathetic, and then we have a lot more to give back. I don't want to give all the thunder away, but I have an amazing person here today. Heather Holland is here, and she's going to talk to us about what is this industry doing that we call healthcare? How can we navigate it? And how did she continue to find the strength, the hope, and the purpose to continue on? Heather!
Hey!
Hi!
Hi, I'm super excited to be hanging out with you and to be a part of this today. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for being on here. I love your background. It's very, very nice, very tranquil.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have to have that in my life, seriously.
Listen, let's get into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I opened the show and we're talking about just things sometimes get hard. Things sometimes get rough. And a lot of times it's health. You have had so many tremendous health experiences that have really shaped where you are today. And I know cancer was a big part of that. It's almost like you don't even know where to start. Let's start here. Where are you now? Where are you now in your journey?
Oof. Okay. So I am better than I was before I got sick. And when I say that, let me start that I've been sick, ill with disease in my body, discomfort in my body, probably since my teenage years. And I say that I'm better now. I'm still getting healthy as far as getting my strength back, but I want to say I'm healthier because emotionally, psychologically, energetically, I'm much more aware and in tune with my body and what it's needing and how to take care of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that was kind of that's a skill that we all kind of have to master, and sometimes we just don't want to, and we're not afforded like the necessity to have to do that because we don't have to endure some of the things that you have. When you were younger, you said it started a long time ago. How did that develop, and how did it start becoming kind of an issue that you needed to target?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start here. So first of all, I was raised predominantly by my grandparents. And a lot of people don't know, but actually both sets of grandparents live here in Ohio. One set was in Wilberforce and the other set was in Xenia. And my grandfather retired early. My mother had me when she was 16. My father was 17. And they tried to make it work and it didn't. You know, it was young love, right?
Yeah. I'm single. I don't know anything about it. I'm single, so
right. You're funny, and you never know. You don't know what you don't know. You know, you just kind of work through stuff. But anyway, so my grandfather retired. He had worked. He was a supervisor at DESE as well as my grandmother. He retired early to raise me. He also at the same time was teaching at Wilberforce University and at Central State. And so my life growing up until about the age of 9 was I would attend board meetings with him. I would be at the colleges with him, at the church with him, and our fun time was being at the library, right?
Mm.
So it was research, be active, be an advocate, all of this. My health issues started probably around the age of 10 to 11. My mother had moved to Wisconsin, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, to be exact.
Wow.
And really wanted to parent me. And so my grandparents weren't excited about the thought, but they thought that, you know, a child should be with its parent if the parent is willing and able to take care of her or him, so, or them.
Yeah.
And so having said that, I moved to Oshkosh, Wisconsin with my mother. It was I want to say predominantly white, but it's actually probably fairer to say that it was all white town. There were very few people of color. The most of them, if they were there, were at the university. And so from late elementary school all the way through high school, I was raised in a very institutionalized white way of thinking, right? So it was very factory job area. You either worked for a factory and made decent money, or you somehow had you had money from other ways, right? Like it was either there was a huge class gap, right? Either had upper middle class, or you had very poor people. My mother was a DJ for a local radio station called Super Hit 97.
Okay.
And so I never really had a babysitter, but I was old enough to not have a babysitter, right? So at nights when she would work, I would go with her to the radio station, and I would sleep on the radio station floor. And then during the daytime, you know, when I was at school or whatever, I'd come home, and then I was like a latchkey kid for a little bit of the time. That's a long background to talk about my health history, but it starts off with that because, one, I was taken from people who had raised me. I knew my mother, loved my mother, but that wasn't what I had known, right? That wasn't my lifestyle. And so, one, I was taken from the family that I knew. Two, her lifestyle was very different than my grandparents. You know, she was a struggling single mom. My grandparents weren't necessarily well-to-do, but I never had a concern or thought about where my next meal was coming from, or if the car was going to work, or, you know, different things like that.
Yeah. And
so that was something that was new for me. And then also, those people who might be familiar with Wilberforce is a middle to upper middle class, or was at the time, and a middle to upper middle class area that was historically one of its kind because it was built around Blacks, Black African Americans, and even though those that were multiracial or biracial Blacks still considered themselves to be a part of Black, right? Because in those times it was the one drop rule still, right?
Yeah.
You didn't get to talk about your identity other than what society deemed you as, right? So I came from a very loving, supportive area, and then went into this area where I became it's what are you? Because, you know, you're definitely Black, but there's something else there, right? So we need to characterize you. We need to label you for something. And then two, no matter what that label is, it's different. It's an other. And I was very much treated as an other. And also my mother, I love her to death. She did her best parenting job, right? Because again, let me say, she's 16 years older than myself, right? And so what the heck do you know at 16? What the heck do you know in your 20s as far as like trying to navigate your own life, your own identity, and then help your child, right, in this sort of community that isn't necessarily supportive or wanting of someone who looks like me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you added that that caveat in there, that balance, talking about a young mother and really giving grace because they're just learning things too. So it
Oh
really
yeah.
kind of helped. Yeah, that was a nice add there because I think a lot of times we overlook just how difficult it can be to try and figure your own life out and you're not even there. And
Oh my gosh.
then,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stop you. I was just going to say, my gosh, not only was she a single mom, but she was a baby, right?
hmm,
Like my mom, for what she was able to do for me, did the darn thing. Let's
yeah,
just let's just put it that way, right? Like, um, she was not someone who, and so I get a lot of my independence from her too, right? She was not someone who would ask for help, even though I'm learning to ask for help, and I'm trying to teach her to do the same thing. Um, but independence as far as strength and woman power and what you can do on your own. So I owe a lot of that to her.
wow,
I really do. And she again was young, and so she didn't understand the health struggles. And also, I want to talk about weathering, which started for me young. And weathering is when you have things that are like institutionalized isms, right? Whether it's racism, classism, homophobia, trans issues, that type of stuff, right? When you deal with the BS, right, from the fear that is associated with those things, when you deal with the BS on a daily basis, it's called weathering.
mm,
And that stress adds to your health issues, concerns, and the detours that go along, with all the diseases that come, right? Um,
I think a lot of people miss the psychological and emotional impact that those things can have on the body, specifically if there's other things going on too. Just the huge impact that that can have.
oh goodness, yes. So um, people don't think about it. There's this saying now, or it might be the title of a book that talks about the body keeps score, right?
Mm,
It really does at a cellular level. And until you work through the traumas, the consistent trauma, the consistent stress, right? Which is hard when that stress it never lets up, right? For
mm,
the weathering piece, right? It's hard to work through those things, but until you do, until you find a way to manage it or to navigate it, your body at a cellular level is holding on to all of that pain.
mm.
And it will find a way to make you sit your behind down and take notice, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, kind of jumping ahead, that's what it did to me was um, first for me was after that I gained a lot of weight when I graduated high school because, and I didn't know this, but psychologically I was trying to protect myself from things that had happened to me. I had been sexually assaulted when I was in high school by a peer.
Mm,
I had had other men not necessarily sexually assault me, but do things or say things that were an assault to my soul and to who I was as a human being, right?
sure.
I've had women, right, who have kind of attacked or traumatized me for technically being a quote unquote pretty girl, right? Or you have other people, like even in my own family, and they didn't know any better, right? Because they're dealing with their own racial traumas of what has happened to them. And so here I am, the lighter skin one, right? The one who has certain features and all of that that seems to be more readily acceptable by society, right? And they are this beautiful, dark skin, group of people, but their experience with racism was very much so different than my experience with racism. And sometimes they would also sometimes put their traumas on me or say things that were unkind or do things or treat me in ways that were unkind. And it wasn't purposely try to hurt me. It was it was them unfortunately not having dealt with their own traumas,
Sure.
their own pain. And it unfortunately led to me taking on a lot of the guilt and a lot of the pain of people around me. Because I felt like if I made them better, if I made them healthier, then I would be okay, right? So I'm not taking care of myself first, but taking care of them, and then I'll be okay.
Mm,
And that caught up with me. right? So there goes the weight gain in my college years. And then after college, I met my ex-husband of 20 years, of almost 20 years. We were together, and finally started to do some healing through my relationship with him. Year 2 or 3 of my marriage, I started having some health issues.
So year
And
2 or 3 of your marriage, I am so it's just opening up my mind up. It's opening my mind up so much to parallel physical challenges with emotional challenges as well. It's just, it's hearing it is different than just kind of like reading a book, and hearing it, I just think of different people. I think of myself. I think of, all of that. It's just like, wow, we carry around so much. Could this be part of the physical manifestation as well? So deep. You continue to have different, but you had a lot of different health things going on.
I did. So here was a thing. So one thing that I was taught raising when I was raised, and was that it's about being successful, right? So sort of like the W.E.B. Du Bois talented 10th, right? That you have to be a leader, you have to be better, right? And so as a woman of color, as a woman, right, from both of those things, you're always told that you have to be better, work harder, be stronger, in order to just kind of compare, right?
Yeah.
My experiences as a woman and as a Black woman or a woman of color is definitely different than my white counterpart or as a white male, where it's sort of seen that if you kind of do the whole bootstrap thing, right, as a white person, right, you can get ahead, right? And there never really is. First of all, the bootstrap thing is a myth. Let me just say that first and foremost. That's a myth, right? Like, there's always someone supporting you. There's always someone who's guided you, led you. Even if they've been a negative in your life, they've sparked you to do better, be better. Let me start with that. However, as a person of color, as a woman, as a combo of the two, right? You know that to even get a seat at the table, you have to be smarter, work harder, be funnier, be nicer, kinder, right? All of these things that other people don't have to do in order to just kind of compare. And so having that to have been taught to me, number one, by my grandparents, and they weren't trying to hurt me. They were honestly trying to prepare me for life and be honest, like, okay, this is what you're going to be faced, this is what you're going to face, right? And then to see that actually mimicked and come to fruition when I go to school, even as a kid. I remember in 5th grade, I had a crush on a kid, white kid. His name was Chad Lorgy. I'll never forget it. And my best friend at the time was Claire Jetner. She and I are still friends to this day, and I have no idea where Chad is. But anyway, I remember having a crush on him, and Claire saying she went and talked to him for me. And she said, well, Chad said, if you were a little lighter, a little shorter, and a little prettier, he might consider dating you. Right. And I was like, I took that to heart.
Yeah.
I took it to heart. And at the time, in that era, I mean, if that was nowadays, right, it would have been cancel culture everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Right. But in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, right, when I'm coming up, it was like, oh, okay, so how do I do better, right? How do I get him to like me more? Okay, I can't make myself lighter, but how do I make myself thinner? How do I make myself prettier? How do I do all of this? And I will say at that time, and this happens to a lot of women, right? Not just Black women, but a lot of women. I was at the age of 9, I was 5'7", 140 pounds, had, probably a 34C chest, right? And I looked like an adult woman. And so I was treated that way by a lot of people. So for him, it was just a reckoning or a realization that, like, oh, okay, well, I still am an oddity, right? I'm an oddity. I'm different. And so how do I fix that to fit in?
Yeah.
And so that fitting in now, transferring that now to right my 20s, even my 30s, it still was, how do I be successful? I have to fit in. Okay, now that I fit in, how do I show them that I'm worth being here for the seat at the table? Okay, well then if I make a mistake or if I mess up or something, I'm out the door faster than anybody else, right? I get kicked to the curb faster than anybody else. And then on top of it, I eat my feelings, I eat my emotions. And I'm not even just talking about physically with food, I'm talking about stuffing them down, right? Like, okay, this has to be about me. So it can't be about society, it can't be about anybody else. How do I fix me in order to be okay? Right? How do I make everybody else feel okay? Again, how do I make everybody else feel okay so I can be okay? And so I did some things to myself. I traumatized myself, not even knowing it. I had gastric bypass surgery in 2003 to lose the weight. I purposely gained the weight though. So I always had trouble losing weight. I purposely gained weight, probably about 20 to 30 pounds. So I would, sorry, that's my phone going off. It's my son, emergency ringer.
Do you need to get it? Emergency?
No,
okay.
it's not. It's an emergency. My child is at school probably asked me, does he have money on his card so he can go to his friends?
That's an emergency. That is an emergency.
Right. When you're 16, yes, it is. But if it's an emergency, he will actually call. So that was
got it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love
my children. I love my life. Anyway. Yes. So it went back to just this whole caretaker thing, right? Which I hate to do this, but I'm going to go back to slavery, right? Like women were, especially Black women, were seen as either mammies, workhorses, or sexual beings. That was our three roles, right? And so here comes the pretty girl thing, right? So I can be this sexual being. And so that's where, I had gained weight, right? And to sort of protect myself from men. Here comes the workhorse thing where I've got to work harder, do better, be better than everybody else in order just to have a seat at the table, right? And then here comes the mammy thing of I have to care for and be a caretaker for everybody else around me, otherwise I can't be okay. And so from doing that, my gosh, I had the bypass, right, which almost took me out. And led to, didn't lead to other complications, but was the start of me having some malabsorption issues, which then that combined with the emotional traumas and stuff then led to a railroad of tours and problems, which is where I'm at today with really it was recognizing my traumas, healing myself, speaking my truth, changing my diet, right? Changing my thoughts about medicine, and then really researching the healthcare, the industrial healthcare medical complex that we know today as like hospitals, doctors, physicians, right? All of that, researching all of that to get back to who I should have been before I was born. And let me say that to get back to who I should have been before I was born into a society that wasn't really conducive to who I was or my characterizations or my marginalizations, right? Now I am taking back my own, and I'm empowering myself, and I'm taking back my own freedoms through my choices, and how I treat myself and my body.
That's powerful. That's powerful. A lot of the things that you've mentioned are kind of in the national conversation now, but in an opposing way. So many things that you said, a lot of people disagree with those things being an issue right now. When we talk about colorism, people say, well, that's not an issue right now. When we talk about, women in different spaces and having to work harder, specifically women of color, we're having to work harder, people will say, well, that doesn't happen right now. We had a Black first lady, So there's all of these things that are still sort of barriers in some way, whether it's the conversation, whether it's to the table, whether it's an understanding of trying to express a different a different world, being, let me say it that way, being Black and perceiving things it's just different because we experience it differently. For you, even going into some of the medical situations that you did, you experience, and you talked about being passionate about knowing what the doctors are doing, and a lot of that comes from your experiences. You went into some of your visits and some of these diagnoses that they gave you, but something didn't feel right in some of them, and you talked about being other. Do you think that you were treated differently in some of the ways that you were cared for because of either being a woman or being a person of color?
Oh, definitely, definitely. So let me start off by saying, so I actually went into psychology because I wanted to heal myself emotionally, and I wanted to be able to do that for others. But what I recognized was, even in psychology, right, just like the medical complex, we have been taught that not sometimes, that emotions aren't the truth, right? And that being rational is what is the right way to be. And so what happens is we are taught by our doctors and by others that we need to reframe things, right? And reframing can be a really good psychological tool when you are walking into a situation and you need to understand the other person, right? Like, did they say something that hurt your feelings, or did they say something that was offensive, right? And so sometimes it is helpful to reframe because you might be looking at it from your point of view, your perspective. And if you're able to look at the other person and what they're going through, right, it doesn't mean that what they didn't do is offensive. It doesn't mean that they don't need to be retaught, but it just means that you understand where they're coming from. And so then you can then have like a healthy dialogue versus just getting pissed off, walking away, throw your hands up, which is what happens nowadays, right? Nowadays, everybody's like this. Not only are we cancel culturing like everybody else, but we're cancel culturing like our friends and people who will actually might be good for us just because we're scared to deal with it, right? So what happens though is that in the bad sense, the negative sense of reframing is that our doctors micromanage our feelings and our emotions about what we're dealing with. Technically, and I kind of shared this last night with you when I sent you some of the information about my background, could have sued a local hospital network 50 times over. Seriously. One main example is so when I was diagnosed with cancer, wonderfully, my oncologist at that time, which was through a local network here, was a family friend because our kids had played tennis together. And I had dealt with a blood disorder, neutropenia, for a lot of my life. COVID hits, and people are kind of like, okay, do I leave the house? Do I date? What do I do? Right? And so I had met someone online, and he lived in Indianapolis, and we started dating, and had been dating for several months. And one of the times that we had been, and I'm just going to put my stuff out there for everybody because I'm a real human being, right? One of the times that we had been intimate, he had felt my breast and stopped and said, Heather, like, you need to check this. Now, mind you, we had been intimate the week before, and there was nothing. I had had a mammogram like a couple years before that. I was always doing self-examinations, all of this happening, and nothing had been shown. So when that happened, I immediately called my hematologist turned oncologist. She got me in 2 days later because of our relationship. Mind you, it takes a month. So this is actually where relationships can be helpful, right? I will also say, though, that she's also a woman of color. So that's helpful too, right? She got me in 2 days later, felt my breast, and then was like, okay, normally it takes months to get a biopsy, but because of our relationship, she got me in that following Monday, right?
Wow.
To have a biopsy. She got me in the following Monday to have a biopsy. this woman loved me enough, right? So this is how you really know when things go well with a doctor or with healthcare. This is how you know that things really go when they really go wrong. Right? She loved me enough that she sat on her computer and waited for the My Chart to pop up so I wouldn't get it first. She called me from her cell phone. She called me at home that night and said, "It's cancer. Get to the office tomorrow morning."
Thanks for watching part 1 with Heather Holland. Part 2 of the interview is going to be coming up next week. Make sure you tune in, and we're going to hear what Heather did after she was diagnosed and what she continued to do to make sure that she received the best treatment possible, and what advice she has for you if you're in a challenging situation like she was. So join us again next week. Go to phillipo'rourke.com to see more, and thank you again for watching.
Don't